everybody. Welcome to Improv FAQ at Length. This is a series of longer conversations about improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them. I'm James Quesada.
And I'm Bob Wick.
And we have with us a good friend of ours, Mr. Steve Kleinedler. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Hey, thank you both for having me on.
It's so good to see you, man.
Likewise.
So Steve is originally from Michigan, has spent time out in the Philly improv scene and is now out in Boston. And yeah, I know the way that I know you, Steve, is from the times that you come home to visit Michigan. Yes. I get to play with you every once in a while when you hop into a set, and I'm lucky enough to be part of the team that you jump into. And you're one of my favorite people to play with. And talk shop with. So I'm excited.
Thank you. I love the fact that Go Comedy is there. When I go back to Michigan and there's not a lockdown, I always stop by, and I love playing with everyone there. It's always, even though it started up long after I left Michigan, it's still like coming home in a lot of senses of the word.
Yeah, totally. And of course, there's typically Diff, where we get to hang out with you and talk.
There we go. A shameless plug. I love it.
The 2020 thing that never happened, but it's a great T-shirt.
Man.
Yeah. So and again, like running into you at Diff, and anytime we're in the same neighborhood talking shop is always a lot of fun. So, okay, the topic for this episode is going to be conflict versus argument, or conflict and argument. And basically what we have in mind with this topic is, there's conflict can be a negative thing if it is just kind of like making the scene stagnant, but it can arguably be like a necessary thing for story to evolve, and that includes a standalone scene has its own little story to it, and some form of conflict generally can be said to exist in there. So we want to talk about, like, what is the difference between conflict that drives and helps story and a scene versus arguments that just seem to be going nowhere or hindering the scene.
Right. Usually when I am a coach or teaching an improv class, I started teaching at Improv Boston back in 2003, continued on when I moved to Philadelphia in 2011, and now I'm back and done a lot of teaching over the years. And most of my thrust is relationship based. And it was funny because I'm coaching a group of for the Vintage Improv Festival, was a 50 plus people who are 50 plus, and I'm doing a workshop series for them. And we just had a class last night, and this came up. There was a really great scene. At the end, one of the students was like, "Oh, we were arguing, but I was always told not to argue, but da 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 da." And I'm like, well, sometimes we say in Improv 101 not to do this, not to do that. And it's as a way of like getting over this default mechanism of instantly bickering with someone, or, going into that I can't pay the rent type of scenario. But you're past that now. And in the scene that these two actors had done, there was, an argument, but the point of the scene wasn't about the argument. We learned so much about the relationship between the two characters in the course of the argument that the argument was secondary to the scene. It was like a template over which we saw the enrichment of these two characters. When I teach, one thing I really hammer home is, use your silences, listen to your body, don't say things that are untrue to what you're indicating. And they were really keyed into each other, and they were reading off each other. And I forget the exact nature of the argument, but the mechanics of the argument weren't important at all. We learned their relationship to each other, their relationship to a now deceased parent. It was an engaging, interesting scene. And that's a long way of saying is arguments per se aren't bad. An argument without a relationship beneath it is tedious.
Yeah.
We've seen it before. I've certainly seen it before. There's no point well, like many conversations in improv, if there's no relationship basis behind it, it's just kind of empty words with people talking to each other, neither person listening to the other side. We don't learn anything about these people. The two characters don't learn about each other. The two actors aren't connecting. So I think in a lot of times when we say don't argue, it's because arguments tend to bring out those bad habits. But if you are really focused on character and your scene partner, you can do almost anything and make it usable because you're focusing on the relationship. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's the perfect answer. I completely agree, because if you don't have that relationship and you have an argument, what's the stakes?
Right, right.
What do you win with this argument with a stranger? You're never going to see the person. It's a conversation on a plane.
Right.
You'll never see this person again.
Right.
So who cares?
Yeah, it's funny. And there's that 101 thing. It's like, always know your scene partner, never be strangers.
Yeah.
And last night, two of my students did they're not my students, they're people taking a workshop from me, did this fantastic scene where it turned out that they were two strangers who went to the waiting rooms of maternity wards, not because they or their partners were having children, but they just liked being in a place where there was joy because life was coming into being. And, afterwards,
wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. And afterwards, one of the students was like, well, we didn't know each other and we're not supposed to be strangers. So, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, your relationship was you were two people who found joy in this shared thing. And that's totally fine. So at some point in everyone's improv career, you have to assess what 101 rules were there as like safety wheels, training wheels that you can take off or not worry about. It was such a rich scene, to shoehorn in this, relationship would have been odd.
Yeah. And I think that the way that I kind of phrase relationship differently so that people kind of don't need titles to associate it or even a history is like, it's just about how the characters feel about each other. And if they're kind of ignoring each other or apathetic about sitting next to each other on a plane or waiting for a bus together, that if they're not making each other feel any particular way, then it doesn't matter. But if they're paying attention to each other and that makes them feel a certain way, that is a relationship.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because I guess there is some ambiguity. I don't necessarily mean, doctor, patient, sibling, parent, child, whatever. Beyond that, what is the connection that these two people have? That connection is the relationship between them as opposed to, that I'm an X, I'm a Y, we're going to solve crime.
So how do you
Algebra Squad? I'm sorry.
I'm an X. No, I'll watch this.
So first of all, let's go back and kind of unpack why it is that people are kind of discouraged from arguments or conflict. It's got a relationship with yes and whatnot. But what is the reason that we really steer people away from conflict when learning?
Two things there. One, early on, arguments just evolved into I like pink. No, you don't. You like green. Blah, 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 blah. We're not learning anything about it. Often the ways that the problem is fixed, but not really, is all of these disingenuous yes statements that come before the but. I like green. I hear what you're saying and I agree with you, but no, you don't. And fortunately, once you call students' attention to this, they tend to pick up on it. I'm all about simple, direct statements. And if you think you can get away with saying but by prefacing it by how much you're listening and how much you're agreeing, when you get to that but, you've just contradicted it. When it's much stronger to chop all that off, don't say the but, and just say what was coming next. Right. I think it makes for a good 101, rule, because until there's the potential for just getting locked into this exchange where neither side is listening, and everyone's just putting on their water wings and trying. I think it's helpful in the beginning, but I think it gets internalized in ways that are unhelpful, and then students have to unlearn that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of students pick arguments in the beginning because showing anger is such an easy emotion to display.
Yeah.
And we kind of want to push them away for that so they can show a range of emotions rather than, oh, I'm angry guy all the time. Yeah. Look at this character I'm playing. Bold choice I'm making.
Yeah. And, in very early, not that I teach 101 that much, but when I do, it's like if they're angry, I'm like, okay, well, be angry about the same thing. Be on the same page with your anger. Be of like mind. I certainly, my acting partner Ralph Andracchio, who I'm in Sad Trombone with, in our argument scenes, you learn about these characters. You learn why they're angry, why they're distrustful in scenes that skew along that axis. I'm really going with the math metaphor today. Asymptote for justice.
Asymptote. So, like, what about when? So we're kind of talking about like, okay, why do we steer people away from conflict? And then sometimes conflict is okay. But part of the main question here that I also want to talk about is like, in a way, almost like we redefined relationship being like how you feel about each other, and that kind of makes it a more broad definition than just like what your title is. Conflict can also be kind of broadened up, and in a way it's kind of necessary, because if you have this like yes and even if you're not just playing lip service, but just yes, I agree. And then like, it is cold out. Let's put our jackets on. Yes, let's put our jackets on. And let's start a fire. Like, ooh, let's start a fire and have s'mores. It's like, so at some point, it's not that something needs to be wrong, or there doesn't necessarily need to be a problem, but like conflict, some kind of like something has to be introduced there before it just becomes like blah, yes, anding, right?
Exactly. Good conflict is born naturally out of the situation. In your s'mores example, perhaps you were reminded of how you were burnt the last time you made s'more, whatever, there's a million things, but you can also take that in a positive direction too. But to arbitrarily, choose, s'mores are awful. What is motivating that? If I were an actor in a scene and my scene partner was doing that, I would be, in that moment of instant calculation, be thinking, they are angry, but in a shallow way, in a surface way. This anger is on the surface. What's really going on here? Why did they feel this way? Why, what did they get off me to do that, if anything? What are they getting out of the situation? What is in that I can pick or use to inform why I'm there with them, Yeah.
Or even like if it's like, I'm thinking of like when, if you don't have conflict, how that becomes a problem, like, because let's say that you're in a scene that's like whatever, that like we're cold and we're gonna make a fire. I'm just picturing the scene from Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels. But they're cold, they're making a fire to keep warm, and even if it seems boring, and then you're like, oh, okay, so how's your week? And it's like, okay, well, then the conflict can be that these two are feeling awkward and feel the need to make small talk with each other. That is a form of conflict. It doesn't have to be with each other. It's like this tiny little thing that's like, you might not think about it as conflict, but really feeling awkward and wanting to break the ice with small talk is a type of conflict, right? So
I think in that regard, the word conflict is being used almost as an umbrella term for the impetus for the tension.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
What is the tension in this scene? We're around a fire. We're friends. We're talking. There's some trepidation. What's digging into that, and it all comes back to like listening not only to what your scene partner is saying, but listening to what you yourself are saying.
Yeah.
So many times people just blow through their opening bits and they're like, I'm 30 seconds into the scene and I don't know what to do. Flail, flounder, throw more stuff at, talk about the mats, blah, 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 And there have been so many things. And it's like, you know what? You had marshmallows all along. If you had stuck in and thought about the marshmallows and the graham cracker, you would have found something. We keep dropping all of these wonderful gifts for the next shiny object. And when we run out of shiny objects, we go to the inventions instead of the discoveries. And then the scene's off the rails. But you're right. What is the impetus for the tension? What is making this? Why are we seeing this specific moment in time between these two characters? What's special about this campfire, And maybe it's just a touching moment in time, and that's fine too. But there's a reason why the audience has a window onto this moment between two characters whose existence existed before the scene and will continue to exist after the scene.
Absolutely. And I think a mistake, you just mentioned it, people go so fast, and all you have to do is attach a want to something you discovered in the first couple seconds. I want marshmallows. That's
all you need.
That's easy. And then we'll discover why you want marshmallows, because I'm a comfort eater, or I just haven't had one in a while. It doesn't matter. Like I found out I had diabetes and I don't care,
Ralph and I together and singularly have been teaching workshops for years. Sometimes we call it strong initiation. Sometimes we call it sustaining a scene. And it's just all about paying close attention to those first couple moments. And, one thing that he and I have gotten good at is like, if I'm watching two actors and there's this moment and there's a silence or whatever, and someone moves in a certain way, but then they say something that's at odds with their body movement, we'll be like, right there. What were you going to say? Say that. And the students are often caught off guard with like, how did you know I was not thinking what I said? And, I've learned to spot it a mile away. Yeah. And almost always what they were going to say and didn't serves the scene so much better. A lot of times they were like, well, I didn't want to give away, X, Y, Z. And I'm like, unless you were doing a short form guessing game, improv is not a guessing game. We're not trying to make the audience guess what we're thinking or we're not trying to make our scene partner guess what we're trying to think. Say what you feel. Say what you mean, and you can build off it.
I had so many students like, well, I was going to reveal that later. How are you so sure that this scene isn't going to get edited before you reveal that information?
Or how are you so sure that something isn't going to happen that would cause that information to become irrelevant? And you'll see these students, it's like after the scene shifts, it's like, I got to say that thing. And then like it comes out of left field. It's like, unless you're literally doing interrogation as a short form game, there's no need. It's not a guessing game.
Yeah. We actually kind of talked about this a little bit on Sunday, but I think we should, I would love to talk about it more in this context is, because it's a tricky balance between doing what you guys are saying. And it's like, when you feel that something is true, express that thing and bring that to the scene. That can be a great, powerful choice. But also sometimes, whether it's like, we were talking about calling out the game and how that can make it less fun. If you kind of just name exactly what's going on sometimes, as opposed to just like playing something.
Yeah. I'm not talking so much about calling out what's going on. I'm talking about calling out what's going on.
Okay.
How you feel, like the emotional state. It's more, what I'm speaking about is more your internal drive, as opposed to like, we're Martians and the vending machine is out of Snickers, when
I'm thinking about types of things that I'm thinking about calling out, that can deflate the game or the tension is like, oh, you seem to get really worked up every time I talk about visiting mom.
Oh, great. First of all, I hate the word always in scenes because no one says this in real life. You always do X when I say Y. No,
Yeah.
you rarely use that pattern in real life. And yes, what you're doing is you are calling out what you're seeing. That's a thing that doesn't need to be said. If you know that, your scene partner knows that, play through that pattern. I'll get back to the pattern in a minute. Anytime someone says, every time you always do X when I do Y is 95% of the time shorthand for I'm mad at you. Rarely is the you always do X makes you happy. It usually makes people mad.
Right.
And I will side coach people to get to the point of like, well, how do you feel? Da 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 da. And finally, they're like, I'm mad at you, and I'm like, well, say that rather than saying you always, you always pour yourself a glass of milk whenever I do the dishes and make noise. You always pour yourself a glass of milk. Well, that's stupid to call out, especially if it's something that's always done. We know it. Just say you're making me mad right now, and explore that. I used the word pattern a few minutes ago, and I use that instead of game only because there's so many schools of improv, and every single one of them has a slightly different definition of game. Many schools of improv approach game from a different angle. I just never use the word. And the parts of classical game that I think are useful, I refer to it as pattern recognition. Like if you're good at game, you see what the pattern is, and if you're really good, you're able to manipulate the pattern from inside the scene using your actor brain, because you're marrying your actor brain with your character's inputs and thoughts. And it's like, okay, we've set up this thing that when X happens, Y happens. I can manipulate the scene to get that in action. But I can do it without calling it out. And I can do it without calling it out by focusing on how I feel, what my connection to my scene partner are, what are the discoveries that we're making, Yeah. So
that's really more along the lines of like, I first of all, I love the term actor brain, because I'm always trying to be like, there are productive ways of being in your head, and kind of referring to it as the actor brain. Sometimes I think about it as like the overhead view of the scene or your third eye, but the actor brain, it's like you inside of the scene, you can apply what you know through the tool of acting.
Absolutely.
I think that's great.
And it's something that I think is coachable and teachable. And I've done it. And I start out by getting people to take pauses and to listen. And in the beginning, the pauses are long. Nothing you would ever want to do for an audience necessarily, but that's the whole point of class and workshops and rehearsals. And over time, that period of time condenses so that, like in a microsecond, I can take stock of what's going on. I can be like, oh, joking, he wants to say this thing, but that would derail the scene, so I'm going to go with this. It in the beginning, again, to go back to Ralph and me, at the top of every scene, we take that moment where we just make eye contact, we connect, and in that very short period of time, we've sized up the situation and can respond accordingly. And in those beat points within the scene, you've got the luxury of time to take. The more you rehearse this, the quicker that time takes. Yeah. But absolutely, you've got actor brain, and you've got the performer thing, and certainly you're steering away. You're steering yourself towards good scene work by having been aware of what's been going on, and the best way to do that is just by listening. If you're on the sideline, keeping a mental like, okay, this person said this, and this person said this, oh, and they did this, and I want to call this back later. Oh, and there's a fun character. In that moment when you need something, you're going to short circuit. Whereas if you're just on the sideline, actively listening, taking it all in, letting it go, 20 minutes later, when there's an edit point and you come on and you need something, it will be there because you were paying attention and you were listening and you weren't trying to categorize it.
Yeah.
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 Put it on your actor shelf. Boom. Take it off.
So how do you guys if you're coaching, teaching in a scene, or no, actually let me you as a performer, if you're in a scene where you're like, okay, we have our footing, we have our what's going on, like you're not lost, you're like, I know what's going on, but you feel like you haven't found, again, we don't need to call it the game or the tension or the story, whatever it is, like it hasn't taken off yet. I feel like that's a moment when a lot of students will be like, okay, let me create conflict.
Yep.
Like instead of that, what are some things that you guys do in that situation?
Back when I was realizing that was a thing, one tool that I used to overcome that was merely to repeat the first line of the scene, something that happened early on, and which is another great reason for keeping the beginning of a scene simple. We don't need a full monologue at that point. That's an exposition dump. Just pure repetition, going back to one. And then, you've done this little 30-second thing and you don't know where to go. Well, if you go back to one, you do another loop around the track, you're just reestablishing the pattern, as it were. It's so secondhand with me now that I think that if I'm ever in that point where I don't know where I'm at, I would probably repeat something. But the beauty with working with Ralph, he and I have worked together now for 8 or 9 years, is like we can just look at each other in the eyes and we've got it and we know it. And that's that's the beauty of working with a duo for so long, is that you've got that shorthand. If I were like doing a show with 5 or 6 random people at an improv festival, I don't know what I would probably resort to repetition or just stronger listening.
Yeah, it is funny. It's like a kind of slowing down or zeroing in. We're like either slowing down or going back to what's already been done,
or both.
Or both. When the intuition, like early on, is like either pick up the pace or create something new, and it's like it's funny that's counterintuitive, but what about for you, Bob?
If nothing has happened yet, I just start interacting with the environment. Just building this world around me until and see how that affects the other person. Like Steve said, you just gotta really start focusing in on everything, and it'll become more clear. I don't want to just pick something out of air and just like, well, today's the day I'm going to tell you I hate you. Which would be a move I would have done in my first year.
Right. I like that environmental move a lot too.
Yeah.
It can be so rich and it can be so simple.
Especially if I do something that takes care of a need. So to go back to building a fire. So let's just build a fire. Let's just see what happens. And then we just have conversation until something pops. And then I'm all over it.
Yeah, like building a fire, I would, pick up the knapsack next to me, because you take this fires, reach in, and as something I tell my students, it's like just reach in and grab something. Your hand will know what it is before your brain does.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
this is just confirming all the reasons why I love to talk to you, Steve, because you are saying in different words things that I are like big talking points in my approach and philosophy and tools and stuff. Reaching out and letting your body inform what the thing is a great thing. I think also, Bob, going to the environment in a moment of lull or feeling like I don't even know if it's necessarily but there's just that moment of recognition that we don't have something to drive into or to push the button on right now. And I think people undervalue how much visual engagement and world building can keep the audience entertained, even if they're not laughing. So that if you are and object work and space work is a huge part of that, to just interact and build a 3-dimensional space on stage. that the audience is with you, like involved in the scene. So that can kind of take away the like that little pull to worry or start getting nervous.
Especially if you can do something that is adjacent to the environment you've already created, but still slightly unusual. Like, so if we're doing a camping scene, I've seen a lot of people try, do the fire move. So what if you're popping up your own camper? That's something that no one's seen, like something unusual that it'll take both your scene partner and the audience a couple of beats to get all on board with. Like, what is this? Maybe some people in the audience don't even know what that looks like. So if you have to cement it with a line or two of dialogue, but it holds their attention.
Tying in with that, I think it's really important, whether you're making a s'more or putting up a camper, take your time with the mime. It's like, if you're making s'mores and you make a s'more in 3 seconds, what do you do now? You've got to make another s'more, or it either turns into the Lucille Ball at the chocolate factory scene, or you drop the s'mores and move on to something else. Take a minute and a half to make a s'more, or to set up a camper. That's going to take the entire length of a scene. You could do,
absolutely.
You could do an entire mono scene in the time it takes to put up a camper. Making a sandwich, take a minute and make a sandwich. Tie your shoe in real life. When is the last time we thought about the mechanics of tying our shoes while actually tying our shoes?
Right.
Like, if the next time you tie your shoe, think about what you're doing. It'll help you on stage the next time you have to tie a shoe. But these things take real time. And when we blow through them for something to do, then we're done with it and we have to find something else to do.
And if you do go longer than you do in real life, the audience is going to make a connection there that maybe you weren't trying to project, but it's like, oh, this guy's really into blank, like, oh, this is a meticulous person or character, and they're really focused.
Yeah, eons ago, I mean, this is like more than 15 years ago. I had a workshop with Susan Messing, and one of the people on stage was gutting a fish. Only they didn't know how to gut a fish, and it as Susan pointed out there, and I realized, it's like, it doesn't really, the mechanics of gutting a fish doesn't matter. The person gutting the fish was invested in it, and in their mind was gutting a fish, and it worked. And so, the scene partner was like, well, I didn't know. I mean, the scene partner knew that a fish was being gutted because it had been brought up in conversation, but couldn't follow the mime, which was, irrelevant. Now I can't remember exactly what Susan said, but it was golden.
Yeah, we can assume. Susan said it was golden. But yeah, and it's like the investment matters more than the legitimacy of what you're doing, because Bob mentioned it in context of like the arguing is like, you are not the person that is trying to win this argument. If you legitimately win for the character, that win is completely gone after the scene is over. The fish, there is no fish. So if you doing a good job at it versus doing a bad job has the same result. No fish. That type of argument is not only unnecessary. I mean, it also doesn't reflect reality. I mean, it's just, I don't know.
Well, especially in a world where people don't do enough object work as it is. Why are you trying to get through your first object work to find something else to do? Just stick to take your time, man. Give yourself the gift of time.
Yeah. Oh my God. Having a repetitive motion to do is fantastic. If I can fold towels an entire scene long, I'll fold towels an entire scene long.
Yeah. Really. I mean, it is. You're like, I could do this for the whole scene. Like, that's such a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the arguments thing is like, my brother brought up this term, or the good faith and bad faith arguments. And I had heard it before in philosophy a long time ago, but I hadn't really thought about it in terms of approaching a conversation or an argument. We were basically talking about people in politics or whatever social arguments on Facebook and bullshit, where it's like, are people really trying to hear each other, or are they just trying to argue to win? And really knowing that like with the conscious or unconscious perspective that like, I'm in this conversation and my mind is not going to change, and down deep I know that the person I'm talking to is not going to change their mind as a result of this conversation. And it's like, that's bad enough in real life, probably even worse in improv or in fiction, because it's like you're just giving another layer to pointless arguments.
Yeah. Same things with devil's advocacy. I mean, we're at a point where I don't need a college philosophy 101 dude bro coming at me with some devil's advocate argument. And it also makes likewise for improv. I don't really need to see. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like that difference in like bad faith, where you're not participating with an honest willingness to hear and be influenced, or an expectation of anything to change. Yeah. And that honesty ties in. And it also, I mean, you as an improviser, you have to be receptive to your scene partner. And that means listening and responding. And if you're coming at the scene as a stone wall and refusing to budge or listen or be affected, like going to stand up. I mean,
yeah. You and what you have to say are directed at the audience. Totally. But yeah, that's probably, to me, a good kind of like question to ask yourself if you're in an argument or a conflict, and maybe whatever, like whoever you are as an improviser, if you're like, is this bad conflict or good conflict, asking yourself like, is my character in it for that relationship, Steve, is like, is my character in it to actually learn and grow and change their side or the other side, or does it feel like you're just kind of playing ping pong with an assigned position?
Yeah, I agree with that. And even to expand on that, you can also think of that change as not necessarily A changing B, but A and B changing together at the same time.
In a hypotenuse. Going back to algebra. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you're right that they're changing together. Yeah. I guess we're kind of both talking about real life and improv now, but like it's not about one person yielding or losing versus one person gaining and winning. It's about both people changing for the better because of the conversation.
Yes. Yep. And I think that's the best way to have an argument scene, is to both play it from a vulnerable place with a strong relationship, because if you care, you're going to listen better. You're going to and be more willing to change or meet someone halfway.
Right.
You know, and for the actor brain, you have to realize your scene partner is trying to give you something. So you have to take it and use it rather than try to outwit them. It's not a competition that way.
Yeah. Yep. Some performers are so they don't know what to do when they get what they want. Like at the top of the scene, I want this thing, and the scene partner goes and gives it to them, and it's like, well, I don't want that one, or this isn't any good. It's like, you just got what you wanted. Why are you not happy? Like when you get what you want, celebrate that. It's if you are yelling at someone because you want something and they give it to you, that's a win.
That's funny. I'd like, just because I would love to see a scene where somebody goes like, I want your car, and they go, here you go, and the person goes, yes.
Yeah,
this is great. Oh, thank you so much. Like to have it really matter, as opposed to being like oh shit, now it's like be prepared to
supposed to do now. I have to drive this thing. How do I drive? Oh, we started off in the living room. How am I supposed to get to the garage? The stage ain't big enough. I don't know what to do.
Or they get in the car and they crash.
Yeah, because they're too excited. Like, as long as make it matter is kind of like the rule of thumb to me is just like whatever you want or whatever the conflict argument, even the stranger thing is like, make what's going on matter. Is a basic rule.
Well, yeah, and the whole thing about needing things or wanting, I mean, not wants, but like, predicating a scene about needing to have a specific object that someone has, or needing a specific object that is missing or is lost. Often that's just a stall to get, what you want. And that's one of the first improv things I learned. It was a long time ago.
You don't want to say what you...
Oh, no, I will. I don't want to come off like a name dropper, but it's come up.
Oh, sure.
No, in 1986, my college improv troupe had a workshop with Del Close and Sharna. And the one thing I remember about that weekend, well, two things. One, it was Hands Across America, and we had a hard time getting home. But it was the weekend of... You remember Hands Across America?
Yeah, I remember. Gosh, using that as a reference, though, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was that weekend. We drove from Michigan into Chicago. But the only thing I remember about that weekend-long workshop was basically, have what you need. And, when that was articulated, it was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Why was I not having everything I need? It becomes something you don't have to worry about it. And it like not having what you need, the scene becomes about getting that thing. And then if you get it, then what? If you don't get it, the audience is like, what? Oh, I'm going to name drop one other thing. Another awesome piece of advice I got from Joe Bill out in Chicago. No audience member ever left a show saying, gee, I really wish they'd fixed that bike.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Isn't that an awesome quote?
I love Joe Billisms. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably heard that 20 years ago, and I still use it because it's so true.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the have what you need thing, and I think that goes back to like a pretty practical early improviser rule, because it addresses those moments when new improvisers are like not used to creating the world right in front of them as quickly. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm in a I'm a plumber and I need to fix this sink. Where's my wrench? It's like, you have your wrench on you.
You're a plumber. You always have your wrench.
But it can be like, because you don't see it as a new improviser and you're not in that space yet, it's like, oh, okay, easy answer. I don't have it because I don't have it in real life. But I love the have what you need.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing.
And speaking of Chicago, after I ended up moving to Chicago and took some classes at the Players Workshop of Second City, but then I went into scripted theater for a really long time. And it wasn't until I moved to Boston and started getting back into improv. I recommend improv to every actor, and I recommend acting classes for every improviser. I think the two skills really lend each other to each other's craft. I mean, they're kind of like subunits of the same craft, but I got a lot out of stage acting and watching, and specifically, like, if you find yourself in a play, like, watch the director. How does the director communicate with the cast? How do they get what they want? If they're a good director, that is. You can use a lot of those tools when you direct or teach improvised material. Yeah,
and actually, well, that point kind of brings us full circle to the heart of this question about conflict, because I think in acting and in theater, in drama, conflict is what drives the story. No conflict, no story. And I think that for good reason, we've kind of curtailed that because, comedies and a written plot and, dramas that there's reasons why we kind of disassociate the idea of conflict from improv. But I think getting over that hump and returning to that truth, which I've now kind of re-believed, whatever the word is for that.
Re-believed.
No conflict, no story. Like some form of it just is. You have to liberate your understanding of what conflict, how conflict manifests itself.
Yep.
This has been an awesome conversation, Steve. Thank you so much.
Wow. That went so fast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like, I just looked at the time like, oh, man, we're winding down. Oh,
I know.
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah, we're making up for lost time not being able to have these conversations with you in person, Steve.
Yeah, man.
Well, thank you.
But so before we let you go, are there things going on in the virtual world? Anything at all that you want to plug?
The few things that I'm doing are actually occurring between the taping and the time this airs live. But Ralph and I, at Sad Trombone, we've done a few online festivals. We're doing the Philly Free Fringe Festival now, and we'll probably pop up. And we're having fun. What we did, we're playing with this virtual world. One thing that we did is we did a scripted reading. We transcribed one of our old shows and then did a scripted stage reading of it. And we got a friend of ours, Letitia, to read the stage directions, which were, really goosed up for the point of this. It was a lot of fun. It worked in a really cool way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think there's certain, I think duos work really well over in a Zoom context.
Yeah.
I've seen, I think some forms don't work as well in a virtual environment, but you know what? In months or years, we'll come back to them, and it's just trying and seeing what works for you as a performer individually.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I love the idea of a table read, and but you said you transcribed a previous show of yours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. So, and you recorded it. It's available somewhere online now.
Yeah, some of our shows are like on YouTube, and we sat and we took turns transcribing it and adding in stage directions, and then read it like a stage play.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
It was fun. And like some of the audience members were people who saw the show the first time around. And, afterwards we had questions like, what was this enjoyable at all? And they loved it. It's like, oh, I remember,
wow.
It was like this weird thing, but
yeah.
It was fun.
That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we can link to any of the videos that you want to have linked here. We'll make sure that they end up in the description. Anything else you wanted to plug?
No. Go do good things in the world.
Yeah.
That's a good plug. Yeah.
Be good. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much again for joining us, Steve. And for our listeners, you are either watching this on YouTube or Facebook. Our YouTube channel is where you can find all the most complete and current content. You can also find most of the video content on Facebook, and you can find these at-length conversations as a podcast, the audio only, anywhere podcasts are found. Thanks for joining, and we will catch you next time on Improv FAQ at length. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.